Hello. So it's been a while since I've done a film review, and I want to make a review while it's fresh in my mind about a film I've just watched, Vice, a biopic about the American Vice President Dick Cheney. Um, there's actually a lot of films I could make film reviews for. I've been on a bit of a spending spree of late. HMV's got an offer 5 DVDs for 20 quid, so some of them are definitely worth commenting on. But anyway, I want to talk about this one while it's fresh in my mind. I may have left the cinema about an hour ago. Um, okay. Firstly, I think this might be the first feature film that I can think of ever about an American vice president. Um, there may have been films about vice presidents who later became president, i.e., Richard Nixon, but this is the first film I can think of focusing on a vice president. And that goes hand in hand with the widespread view that Dick Cheney is possibly the most powerful vice president in American history, one of the most influential. Um, so, just a few details about the film. It was released on December the 11th, 2018. It's quite long, it's 132 minutes. It's quite on the lengthy side, directed by Adam McKay, who I admit I'm not very familiar with. Um, Produced by Brad Pitt, Dede Gardner, Jeremy Kleiner, Kevin J. Messick, Will Ferrell, Adam McKay. Written by Adam McKay, and it stars Christian Bale in the title role. And supporting roles in the role of Lynn Cheney is Amy Adams. Steve Carell plays Donald Rumsfeld. Sam Rockwell is George W. Bush. Alison Pill as Mary Cheney. Lily Rabb as Liz Cheney. This is Junior Liz Cheney. Jesse Plemons plays the narrator, Kurt. I'll mention him in a minute. Tyler Perry as Colin Powell. Justin Kirk as Scooter Libby. Lisa Gay Hamilton as Condoleezza Rice. Eddie Marzan as Paul Wolfowitz. Bill Camp as Gerald Ford. Stephen Adley Gurgis as George Tenet. Don McManus as David Addington, and there's a number of other roles there. Probably the two major supporting roles, three major supporting roles. Steve Carell as Donald Rumsfeld, Sam Rockwell as George W. Bush, and Amy Adams as Lynn Cheney. This is the second film made about the Bush presidency. The other major feature film, of course, being Oliver Stone's W. Um, so, basically the film, and a few spoilers here, the film goes through Dick Cheney's political rise, basically. And I think it takes a very unconventional approach. About halfway through, after the defeat of Gerald Ford by Jimmy Carter, it kind of rolls an epilogue, which is not an epilogue. It kind of rolls, if you like, false credits that the Cheneys kind of settled down and that was it. Which, of course, anyone who knows political history knows that it wasn't. Um, the film has an unusual choreography. It's the way it's put together is quite unusual, and it definitely stands out. So I suppose you would give it credit for that because it's not your run of the mill biopic. Um, One thing that is absolutely obvious is political bias. That is without question. And the thing is, McKay doesn't really try to hide that very much. It is a pretty left wing film with a pretty left wing angle. And without taking anything away from Christian Bale, who I think is a great actor, um, it doesn't really do very much to make Cheney a multi-dimensional character. It kind of, as one critic put it, casts him as a bit of a cartoon villain. It's almost Darth Vader-esque in terms of his sinister, the way they film it. For example, it shows a brutal war scene and then Cheney coming along a corridor with sinister music playing. That's a very clever technique that directors use. Oliver Stone has done similar things, and it's very effective. It's very powerful. Um, but I think basically this is a film that will. I mean, I have to say the film's been pretty well received overall. It's done fairly well in the box office. Um, but I think it's sort of a case of preaching to the converted. And I have to be honest, about 15, 16 years ago, when the Iraq War was going on, when that whole thing was going on, I would have totally lapped up a film like this as being what I wanted to hear, because I was a lot more left wing at that time, was very critical of the invasion of Iraq. I still believe it was a massive mistake, but I believe I've evolved in terms of looking at every angle on that. Now, there is no question about it regarding the history. There's no question about it that Dick Cheney is a pretty shady character. I don't think that you need to be left wing to see that. And the film also portrays, credit to Steve Carell again, very powerful acting. And it's kind of ironic in Anchorman. There was kind of a joking reference at the end that Brick, the character Brick, ended up as a senior advisor in the Bush White House, and now he's playing an actual real person in a biopic about the Bush presidency. Sam Rockwell as Bush was pretty good, but again, it kind of lent itself a bit to parody. I don't criticize the actors. I think there was some strong talent in this film. Amy Adams plays Lynn Cheney as the strong, supportive wife, um, who kind of inspires her husband to change. The opening scene shows his DUI offense in 1963, his second one. I wasn't aware of that. And it's kind of interesting, both Cheney and Bush Jr. had kind of similar backgrounds in that sense. They were both kind of playboys, and that's an interesting aspect. Christian Bale, I mean, the makeup artist for this film, in fact, I'll just look it up. I'm looking at the Wikipedia article right now. Who done makeup? It doesn't say, but I think there has to be, that has to win some awards, because the transformation of Christian Bale from a tall, average build guy to an overweight, bald vice president 20 years older than the actor, the transformation's incredible. And partly it's a credit to Bale's acting abilities, but also the makeup artist who ever done that. That was very, I mean, really, he looks like Dick Cheney. And when I first saw the trailer, I didn't recognize him. I actually thought Sam Rockwell, because I'm not that familiar with Sam Rockwell. I thought that was Christian Bale playing George W. Bush. So that says something about the effectiveness of the makeup work. Um, so the film go basically makes him into a very shrewd political operator who turns the vice presidency into an institution that he could control. It mentions a lot of things. It mentions let me just get this right, the unitary executive theory, which gives the president absolute power. Um, I was surprised the accidental shooting of Harry Whittington was very brief. I thought they would have made a bit more of that because it was a major news story at the time. It covers a plane affair, of course. It covers, there's bits of the film that are very blunt and in your face. The war scenes, the 9/11 scenes. Um, so they have a narrator, and I think he's a fictional character. I'm not sure. Basically, he's a U.S. Marine, and I kind of suspected they would do that because near the beginning of the film, he says, "Oh, I'm connected with Dick, but I'll tell you about that later on." And basically, he plays a Marine who doesn't die in Iraq. He actually dies in a road accident in the States, and he presumably is a organ donor. And with Dick Cheney's history of heart problems, they show the irony of, oh, look, this soldier who was involved in a war that Dick Cheney orchestrated is now posthumously donating his heart. And again, they didn't hide back from the in your face details, like they showed the heart surgery right up close. I'm not sure what I made of that. There's one interesting thing which attracted quite a lot of criticism. When it showed the rise of the Bush presidency, it showed a focus group, and it showed split opinions on that focus group, and it showed this kind of caricature right wing voter, wearing a sports top and saying he was mad as hell. This was post 9/11, and it was kind of talking about how Cheney managed to link Iraq to 9/11. But at the very end of the film, like post credits, so I don't know how many people hung around to see this, but post credits, they show that focus group again, and they bring it as if it was in today's context. Um, and again, this right wing guy says, "Oh, it's all liberal bias." So it's almost like McKay is anticipating the criticism of his own film, but he's confronted by this liberal guy, or he denies being a libtard, as the Trump supporter puts, and he says, "Oh, but it's all facts, isn't it? They would have had a lawyer to check that out." So that scene was criticized because it's. I mean, this is not a film that is going to kind of change the hearts and minds of former Bush supporters, or Bush supporters, Cheney supporters for that matter, because it kind of lends itself to being a bit, it's like something Michael Moore would have come up with. And I think the director would probably admit that there's a bias there, but the problem is the bias isn't hidden. It's very, very obvious. And again, no criticism of Bale's acting, but it does make Cheney look like a very one-dimensional character. In the whole film, there's only maybe one or two scenes that make him kind of human. One of them is when his daughter Mary came out as a lesbian, and he hugs her and says, "Oh, we love you no matter what." Okay, so it makes him a kind of loving father figure. But then later in the film, it shows them supporting their other daughter in her congressional race, I believe it was in Wyoming, coming out against gay marriage, and then the other daughter, Mary, breaking down and saying, "Oh, they wouldn't sealed off on that." So even the one scene that makes him kind of human, they kind of goes back on that. So again, that was very obvious. I suppose one thing you could say is Dick Cheney is known for being a very stubborn man, a very headstrong man. Without doubt, he's a very shady figure. There is one thing, and I'll close with this, I really took issue with, and that was the ISIS thing. And this is why. The rise of ISIS, there is multiple reasons for that, but one thing that McKay totally ignored was, I mean, he has this epilogue, 4.5 thousand US servicemen died in Iraq, over 600,000 civilians. True. Um, ISIS has been responsible for over 150,000 deaths in Syria and Iraq. It actually negates to dimension Bashar Assad and the fact he actually started the war in Syria with his brutal crackdown on dissent. Um, I mean, this film basically gives the notion of America's to blame for all the world's problems, and particularly, well, almost like Dick Cheney is single handedly to blame for all the world's problems and all the problems in the Middle East. And it totally ignores other powerful actors like Russia, like Assad, and like Saddam himself. So that aspect I have a big problem with. If he'd even put a sort of disclaimer like, and Assad is this, or but totally negating to mention that, it's just playing right into the propaganda of Assad apologists, and I have a big problem with that. I also have a big problem with the very vague reference to, "Oh, America created ISIS." Well, that's really a matter of debate. I mean, the film at best shows vague a vague series of circumstances that led to the rise of ISIS, but there's no solid evidence America created ISIS as a foreign policy position. And that is a line that has been used by every Putin fanboy and fangirl and Assad apologist ever since. I have a big problem with that because it demonizes the West whilst exonerating Assad and Russia. Um, so the film is definitely biased. There is one bit, I suppose I should say. They take a segment from what was actually a Wolf Blitzer interview. They replace him with a woman interviewer, and she says, "Do you have any regrets?" And he gets into quite an angry defense, like, "I have no regrets. I am not sorry for keeping you safe at night." and the world is a complex place. It's not word for word, but along these lines. And if it means being not such a nice guy to do that, then so be it. So suppose you could say that was sort of giving Cheney a fair play. I don't know, but that's that. In a way, I one thing that I was thinking of during this film is America's an open society. American filmmakers can make films hugely critical of American politicians, and that's a good thing. I hope one day, and this is not directly connected, but I hope one day to see a film about Chairman Mao, for example, and the millions of dead that he is responsible for. Um, because there's been so many films about the murky world of American power. I want to see a film for once showing the Chinese Communist Party for what it is. Um, and I know people might think that's totally irrelevant, but we're talking here about the issue of the corridors of power. We're talking about accountability of power. Well, my point is, in America, you can make a film making out the vice president to be like Darth Vader and the Antichrist, and that's freedom. That can be done. And I'm not saying the film's wrong. I think there is a lot of legitimate facts in the film, but that can be done. One day I want to see other powerful players held to account. I hope one day Hollywood makes a film about Putin and his shitty record, or the Chinese Communist Party. Um, I think Hollywood still definitely has a liberal left bias, and this film really, in a sense, was preaching to the converted. I still think it was worth watching. I like some of the angles they used. I like, to an extent, it was original. But that's what I would summarize it. It was very biased, and it didn't try to hide that. Okay, I'll leave it there. And if I get around to it, I'll make other film reviews in due course. Thanks for watching.